Do you have any stories of you, because you've been doing this for so long and you've done it in many different arenas too. Do you have any times that the armature or getting the point down was really difficult for you? Like, and is it always something where maybe you feel like, I want to tell a story about blank, and then you just start there? Or is there toil involved? Like for me, I felt like, man, I'm really trying to wrestle this down, kind of like, what am I really trying to say? And it felt very hard. And I'm not sure if that's weird or good or bad or the other. Do you have any experiences like that or maybe it's working with clients too, where you kind of have to wrestle down somebody else's idea into what it is? Like,
yeah, that's harder. For me, an armature can come pretty quickly. Yeah. But it's a matter of, it's a muscle that you either have exercised or you haven't, right? So it's, if you think of it that way, you just go, well, this is my first day at the gym. Of course it's hard, right? You know, right? Yeah. And so, yeah, it can be difficult. And I'm not saying it's always easy, by the way, but I generally start with an armature for the most part. Yeah. So I know I want to say something. And if you start thinking, if that becomes part of your creative process, then it doesn't become the thing because that's what sparks you. Sure. Yeah. Right. Instead of this cool thing that you saw, you'll go, oh, that's a really good way to illustrate this idea. And I believe that idea. And so, you know what I mean? And so you'll start thinking in those terms. Or often, maybe I'll get a random idea and there is no armature. Then I think, oh, I don't have a story. I just have a random idea. It's not a story until I have an armature. And sometimes I will sit on that idea for years. Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, if I have to, because sometimes it's an assignment, I can find it. I can find a reason to tell the story. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, you can do it, but understand it's a muscle. It's a different way of thinking. And what I find is that I actually don't do very much editing because I'm not creating things I don't need. Wow. So you're going in ready, knowing where it's going. And yes, you're not having to go back and trim stuff because you're not. Yeah. I mean, occasionally, but not almost to the point where you wouldn't notice like one draft from another. I wouldn't even call them drafts. Like, wow. But I've taught students how to do it and they can do it. I think that writing is rewriting. It's not necessarily true. It's not necessarily true. Neil Gaiman, who's great, said the second draft, I'm paraphrasing, but he said the second draft is making it look like you knew where you're going with the first draft or something like that. And I just think, or you could know what you're doing. Like, you know where you're going from the beginning. Yeah. You could know that. That's not an unknowable thing. Right. Yeah. But, some people work that way. But, because I'm dyslexic, I find that actually I would put money on Alfred Hitchcock being dyslexic. I would put money on it. He had a lot of dyslexic strategies and he thought like a dyslexic. There's a certain way dyslexics think. And I think dyslexics are always thinking inside out. So they start with the inside and work out from there. I just think that is the way, like Steve Jobs was dyslexic. And he said, people think design is how something works or what something looks like. That's what he said. The design is what something looks like, but it's really how it works. Right. That sounds just dyslexic to me. Like he was dyslexic and it's like, yes, that's right. Design. So any kind of artistic design, any kind of story design, it's like, well, how does it work? Right. That's the design. What happens on the outside is because of what's happening on the inside. Right. Yeah. And you feel like the having dyslexia that informs because you've had to think that way. Just yes. And so you think that, but the other thing is, at least for me, what I was going to say is like one of the things about Hitchcock is that he could pre-visualize a movie, which is one of the dyslexic strengths is being able to pre-visualize stuff. Okay. The problem with that is a lot of people can't do it, so they think you can't really do it either. So right. It's, right. You know what I mean? They are like, are you sure? And then they have to spend, a year or something working on the movie and come back to where you started because they couldn't see it as clearly. It's a frustrating thing. But Hitchcock, would say that shooting a movie was the most boring thing for him because he already made the movie in his head. He knew how everything fit together and how everything worked.
Yeah.
I had a friend who was working with Spielberg on something, doing storyboards for something. And he's like, man, that guy just knew how to solve problems. It was crazy. Like he could go, this shot needs to be this shot needs to be that. And he could just do it. And he said it was always better. He was always right. And he's dyslexic. Wow. And so, but for me, because, and this is one of the reasons I started thinking about separating words from storytelling. There's a lot of dyslexic writers. Agatha Christie was dyslexic. James L. Brooks, who's written a bunch of movies and big deal TV shows and stuff. He's dyslexic. What dyslexia does for me or did for me was, as a kid, it couldn't feel worse. But because words were kind of my enemy, I wanted to be telling stories, but words were a barrier between me and what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
Right? Because in school, at least when I was in school, they didn't care so much about your content as they did about your spelling and punctuation and all those things that dyslexics are bad at, right? So you could have amazing content, no one cared. But if you were a good speller, then, then you're a genius, right? Even if you couldn't write something that mattered. Right.
Yeah.
And that's really frustrating for dyslexics. But what it did for me is it made me, because the words were a barrier, because spelling was a thing, because all those things were a thing, and even my handwriting's bad and all that, which is pretty normal for dyslexics. So what I did was I had to get it right in my head first.
Interesting. Yeah.
Right. And then write it down.
Right.
So, but if you don't have that issue, if you can type at the speed of thought, like I still can't type. I can write books and blah, blah, blah. I can't type. I hunt and peck. Can't type.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm pretty fast with these two fingers, but spelling is not an automatic process. I have to think about where you know what I mean? That's even if I knew how to type, it would go just as slowly because I have to think. Then this, then this, then this, then this, then this. It's not automatic. But if you can type or write at the speed of thought, then I suppose you can just do this sort of, vomit of words and then come back and peel it back into a story, right? Yeah. Or the things that you want. But that's not really an option for me in the same way.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that writing is rewriting was something somebody who wasn't dyslexic said.